Good morning. I could not be more excited to have this particular conversation because I'm a massive personal finance nerd and have been for a really long time, but also because in the past few years it has become abundantly clear to me that thinking about your finances when you are preparing for retirement or in retirement is too late. And this has also become abundantly clear to me as I've dealt with my own family aging and realizing that their financial issues or their financial preparedness is now, in fact, my issue to deal with. So I want to start out by asking you, what is the biggest financial mistake that you think people make as they're planning for their futures?
Yeah, I think it's hard to probably settle out on just one because there are a handful of lots of examples, and I think it's also very personal. You know, you mentioned your family, so we're all sort of growing up with a set of circumstances and sets of messages that you hear as well. But what we often find is those that actually embrace a budget are actually very well prepared as early as you have that budget. So I won't ask you the question, but I ask myself the question too. Do I really know the expenses that I'm paying for? Do I actually balance my checkbook? Believe it or not, I work at Bank of America. Don't tell anyone, but my answer is no, I don't. And that's not so great. So we find that those that actually understand a budget, that stick to a budget, or just are educated by what you actually take in as it relates to income and you're paying out as it relates to expenses, prepares you very well to ask yourself the important questions around savings.
So I think when we talk about saving and when we talk about aging, the big bear that we're talking about is retirement savings.
Yes, yeah.
So one, the idea of can people even retire anymore? And two, the idea of how much do you need to actually be able to do it and do it well? So I want to ask you, do you think most people in this day and age will be able to retire? And is there a magic number that folks can get to?
Yeah, I don't think there's a magic number. I mean, it's such a personal question. And I think retirement is different now than it was, I'll say it here, I'm 53 years old. If you go back 50 years, I think folks would actually work for one company for a whole bunch of years. They would actually win a version of a watch or some plaque to say goodbye and congratulations, you're now into retirement, which was this linear thing that you just sort of lived out. The definition of retirement now has changed because we all have changed. And so retirement isn't that I'm going to go stop doing something for the next 30 years. Sometimes it's actually I'm just simply starting something new. Or I'm going back and forth into the workforce. So because of that, it's very difficult to say, hey, here's your number, or here's the percentage of income that you should be thinking about. It's always difficult to ask any client that we work with, how much money do you want to have in retirement? What does that even mean? Because I don't know what I'm going to do in retirement unless I do. And if I do, it's a little bit easier. And so the question of, are folks going to retire? That question has to be posed to every single individual. It's very specific to what your hopes and dreams are and the reality of the finances that you have or the expectations of what you will be earning or not. I think there's lots of questions around Social Security. Will it be there or not? I think a lot of the retirement benefit programs, if you work for companies that offer retirement benefit programs, are designed for you to actually take ownership of your own retirement savings. I think of things like 401k plans, savings programs. I think of 403b plans if you're in the health or educational industries as well. They're designed with advantages around savings, so you take on that nut to crack versus, some additional programs like Social Security. So I would love to give you a blunt answer that says, here's the magic number and here's what it means, but it's so individual and it depends on, what every individual is going to go through and what their goals are.
So what are some of the questions you're asking people when they come in and they're trying to figure out, am I saving enough? Will I have enough when I retire? How are you getting them to the place where they understand what they actually might need?
Yeah, I think it is all around budgeting and understanding, expenses first and foremost. Then we need a little help. We need help to understand, are you going to be living in the same house that you have now? Are you going to be living in the same state? Are you going to be working, consulting? Are you volunteering? What are the activities? And what would that expense arch sort of look like? Is it similar to what it is today, or does that change? Does it go up? Does it go down? Does it stay the same? A lot of folks think that their expenses go down. Well, not if you want to travel a whole bunch either, right? So it depends on what the goals are. So we're constantly sitting down with clients asking what's changed. So since we saw you last quarter, Any goals change? Any new people in your family that you're financially responsible for? Any less people in your family that you're financially responsible for? It goes both ways. And how have those things changed? It helps to inform then, how do you actually save? And then what do you do with the savings as it relates to investments? Should they be viewed as short-term investments? You need liquidity. Can you actually have a longer-term view, put it in the stock market, and get a little bit, the opportunity for growth as well? So it's all around what we call goals-based wealth management. You tell us what your goals are, we get to react and make some recommendations.
Yeah. So a thing that I think about a lot as I think about retirement savings, and I know a lot of my friends and family do, is the role that student loan debt, credit card debt, and debt in general plays. I think especially for Gen X and millennials or their parents who have taken out loans on their behalf, it's sometimes a little hard to figure out how to prioritize paying down that debt versus funneling a bunch of savings into your 401k or some other retirement vehicle. How do you talk people through that thinking?
You just hit the nail on the head. Right now, student debt is actually outpacing credit card debt and auto debt combined. It's about 1.7 trillion. Now, I'm a Gen Xer. We're the least researched generation of our time. But what I can tell you is families are becoming the family bank, to the generation that actually is carrying that student debt. And it's changing the dynamic of that generation, too. So when I think of millennials, and, I know there's a lot of research on this topic, but the reality is, even describing adulthood or defining what adulthood means has changed. It used to be partnering up, getting married, having children. Now it's all about financial independence. And so there are a lot of family banks that, are actually financially supporting. And a lot of millennials are actually living home or returning to home after school. And by the way, they're not there doing a dance saying, this is exactly what I wanted. They're looking at this as, I appreciate it, but I actually want to get out, and I don't feel comfortable doing that. And so it puts strains on both sides of that coin. So you bring up a really good point, which is, how then do you balance short-term needs with long-term planning? And it's very difficult to do. Where we start is for those millennials that are working at companies. I think of Bank of America, the number of benefit programs that we have, you got to go to your employer and understand what the offer is. So my biggest angst when I speak to, millennials and the younger generation is, does anybody know what a health savings account is? Does anybody here know what a health savings account is? Okay, so I heard the woo-hoo, and you're exactly right. It's probably one of the best savings vehicles of our time versus anything that we have seen. The challenge in this room is only 3 hands went up. So the challenge that we have as far as the financial services industry is it's on us to ensure that folks are educated in a way that they understand what the tools are. The longer you wait to partake in things like health savings account, you lose the opportunity for tax-deferred growth. Those are advantages that you don't get in normal savings programs. So health savings account, just by the name, is around how you save most efficiently for healthcare costs. But at the end of the day, if you needed to, you could use it for other things as well. So it starts with your employer. And by the way, when we do research with millennials, they fully expect their employer should be providing that type of education and certainly the benefits. So educational programs, if you go to bankofamerica.com right now, you type in better money habits, you can pull down any topic as it relates to a topic that you want to become educated about. We have that online. Every company should have that. We call it financial wellness because every company wants their employees to feel financially well. Why? They want to win the war on talent. They want the best talent at their companies too. So I think it is the race to become educated as to what the tools are. You got to look at your employer as well. And then you individually are going to make the assessment of what can I actually focus on long term because I can actually fix and see the end to paying down debt short term.
So a lot of the benefits around saving for retirement, healthcare, things like that are tethered to work. I'm wondering, are 401ks and HSAs enough, or do people need to be doing more on the side?
Yeah, I think it really comes down again to what your goals are and what your confidence level is in investing. These are longer-term vehicles most often. Health savings account, not necessarily. You may be using them every single year to pay for healthcare costs for you or your family, depending on the situation. So it really comes down to what your goals are. At the end of the day, and this is where the gender difference, they really start to, become apparent to us, is women in general, we take longer to begin to invest. There's lots of reasons for that. One reason is we actually do due diligence longer. So we want to become expert before we start. Now, when I say that, the women in this room may have the same reaction to their own careers. Before they take that next promotion, they want to become expert before they actually say yes. Interesting. So cool psychology about women, huge challenge though. So if we're waiting longer to invest, that actually has impact ultimately to our savings that we have over time. That's a bigger challenge that we find for women. Men, much more comfortable to start investing immediately. Risk tolerance is different as well. Both invest extraordinarily well. So there's not one part of the gender that's a better investor than the other, but the magic of investing faster, saving faster, only helps you to have more options and choices. This is not about a material dance. This is simply about providing more options to you and your family.
I want to talk about the consequences of that, the idea that women start saving later, because there's a study that says 41% of women, and I think we may have some slides to this effect, 41% of women say that not investing sooner was their number one financial regret. So what are the ramifications that women are seeing later in life that would make them say that?
Yeah, so, I actually have a really good friend of mine that's not in the financial services industry. She's been in the travel business her entire life. Actually traveling. She sat down, and she's a little bit older than I am. She just recently sat down with a financial advisor because she wanted to understand, what are my retirement options? She's single, she doesn't have children of her own, but she has children in her family that she's responsible for or likes to support. And after she sat down with a financial advisor, she called me and she was livid, absolutely livid on the phone. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this meeting must have gone horribly wrong. What happened? And her reaction was, she was angry to understand her retirement scenarios. She didn't like any one of them. And what she said was, I'm so angry that nobody forced me to invest. That's the issue, right? So when you think about, the journey of a female in particular, think about it this way, which is the topic of caregiving is our biggest challenge. No one walks around with a t-shirt that says, I'm a caregiver, but when you look at the topic of caregiving, it is a female topic right now. Now, put aside the fact that most oftentimes women leave the workforce to have children, right? And when they return, there's a disruption in their savings. So let's just go back to the 401k. When they're not there at work, they're not earning money. By the way, there's inequity right now. So women on average earn 82 cents on the dollar versus men. So there's a disadvantage there. And that number really hasn't moved dramatically since I've been alive, by the way.
And there's a massive, that accumulates, and if we can go back to the previous slide, that's that massive $1 million number that you see, where when you hit retirement, it really hits the wealth gap, right?
So that's different. Wage gap, okay. 82 cents on the dollar. Wealth gap is what you're hitting. So if you follow a female life cycle, right, and you're actually interrupting your work life with caregiving, whether it's bringing up children, what we also find when women return to work, on average, they make 20% less versus the salary that they left. So there's a disruption of savings. They're making actually less. Oftentimes, they may come in more junior than the role that they actually had. We live 5 years longer, we retire 5 years earlier, and we actually want to become an expert before we invest. That's what defines the $1 million wealth gap over time. So if we're not cognizant every single day that naturally that's what's going to occur, then there's no way we're going to actually outsave that. That's on us. And so there's a difference between earnings gap versus what you're talking about, the wealth gap.
Yeah. So I have one more question for Lorna, but if you all have questions, start entering them into Slido, and we'll get to them in just 1 second. So we've talked about a lot of issues. We've talked about all the ways that this can go wrong. I'm wondering if you had advice, particularly for people who are nearing retirement or who are in those early stages and are very stressed about money. Yeah. How would you advise them?
Yeah, and I think, you got to find a financial role model that you trust. And, I love that we're here having this conversation because I actually think the topic of finances is taboo. It just is. No one walks around and says, I'm just curious, what do you have in your savings account? That's not how it works, right? And it's even more taboo for women. If you look at just editorial pages just in general, I think now, and you all are leading the way as far as bringing topics of personal finance to the forefront, but I learn a lot more about mascara in general than I do about my 401k and my HSA these days. So breaking the taboo, having the dialogue, that's really important. Identifying a financial role model. We do a lot of surveys on our existing clients and our prospective clients too, and we ask the question, who's your financial role model? And we hear things like Warren Buffett and Oprah Winfrey. I'm like, when's the last time you had the opportunity to sit down with Warren and Oprah to talk about your personal finances? You need something just a little bit closer that you can actually reach out to. So breaking the taboo, becoming educated in a way that you feel comfortable. We find women learn better about financial topics seated next to a woman. There's no judgment in that. But if we know that, then let's just go and have circles where we can actually talk about the taboo, topic, which is, what vehicles do you invest in? How much do you put away? What are you concerned about? That goes a long way to giving folks comfort, because I think you just hit on something, which finances, let's be real, can be very stressful if you're not empowered, if you don't feel like you're driving the process and in control of that. So it's fair question.
All right, we're gonna go to some audience questions. First one, what financial strategy should a young baby boomer have in place?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to the budget. I know it's not sexy. I know you're looking for that really cool product out there. There is no one cool product that's going to solve it. There really isn't. But understanding sort of your guardrails of where you can play, that's the magic of where you begin. I go back to those that work for companies that have benefits. If you're not participating in those, understanding what you have to pay down. There's good debt and there's bad debt. Good debt that you can actually get tax benefit on. Bad debt, the one that you can't. But at the end of the day, oftentimes you have both. So you have to prioritize paying down just the way you would prioritize investing up, if that makes sense.
I love this next question from Karina. There's clearly a financial literacy gap. Do you think it's important for schools, lower and higher, to teach students about personal finance?
You got it. If we break the taboo earlier, then we don't actually have to talk about it like this, right? It would be part of the fabric of our conversation every single day. Think about it this way, too. What are the messages that you're sending to the people in your family that you influence? I think back to the dinner table conversation in my house. My father was an accountant. And so I used to hear a lot of things and a lot of judgment around, don't cheat on your taxes and make sure you pay your bills on time. That's important, right? Those are messages that I still think about every single day. And by the way, it actually impacts my relationship too. Quick example. I meet a good-looking dude, right, who cheats on his taxes and doesn't pay his bills on time. How do you think that relationship is going to go for me? It's not going to happen, right? And so just be thoughtful. You've heard messages your entire life that you may not be cognizant of. My question to you is, what are the messages that you're delivering over that dining room table or kitchen table or whenever you eat, right? And so I love this. The earlier that we start, the better prepared our next generations will be. We thought originally it should be freshman year of college. No way. It should be elementary school.
Yeah. All right, next question. I love this one too. Great questions, y'all. How do I save money for my kids' college fund, my retirement, and have money to live now and enjoy living?
Anything else? Find the most efficient vehicles to do so, right? So there's, vehicles like 529 programs that have added advantages to save for educational costs that actually just recently were given more flexibility, not less. What am I saying to you? Find those tax-deferred vehicles. They grow faster because you don't have to pay taxes every single year. You got to balance that, though, with what are you trying to truly sort of prioritize. You're not going to always be in a position to do everything, but you can start prioritizing what you would like to do, and then you have to back into what are the best vehicles to do that. There are other vehicles that sort of take risk right off the table. They're more complex. I think of topics like annuities. Annuities take lifetime income risk off the table. They actually do. They're complex, but that doesn't mean they're not appropriate if that's something that you prioritize as well. So there's lots of different investment vehicles out there. There's lots of different savings vehicles. I talk about the health savings account quite a bit because it reminds me of 529 educational savings products that were built back in 1999. And so, I think there's going to be continued innovation. So where are you getting your financial education to make sure that you're up on the most innovative investment products that are out there that could help your family too?
All right, we're going to close on this last question, but I'm going to actually tweak it a little. It says, how would you recommend younger generations approach the topic of finances with their parents? But I would strip away the younger and say, in general, how does anyone talk to their parents about finances? I know this became the biggest issue for my parents, talking to my grandmother who had lived independently for the longest time and then needed help.
Yes.
And it was very difficult to talk to her and basically act like she didn't have control over her own finances anymore.
This is tough. Every family is different. At the end of the day, you are in the best position to understand the dynamics of the family. Sometimes it helps when you leverage a third party to help with that conversation, right? Because it's emotional. There are generations that believe that, no, we shouldn't be talking about money. That's actually rude, right? And so there are families that believe that, and that's okay. But sometimes it's easier to have a third party person, whether it's a financial advisor, some other financial role model that you trust, to be part of that dialogue and start to bring up by questions, asking what's your intent. The easiest place to begin is with one question: what's the purpose of your money? And then stop talking, because you're going to hear a lot. And then from that, you'll get sort of what are the guiding principles and what's important. And then, of course, it's all based on what you've gone through. In my own family, my dad got sick. My mother insisted on taking care of him. In our family home, it was hard to watch, but that's what she was focused on. And because we went through that experience, my father since has passed, it's easier for my mom and I then to talk about what does she want to be provided as it relates to care. We talk about in the home, not in the home. So that experience has given us sort of the invite to be talking about that. It also allows us to share that experience with other people that we know and love too, makes it easier sometimes. So it really depends on the family dynamic, but I would start with that one question: what's the purpose of your wealth? Makes it a little bit easier to break the ice and start talking about what are the guiding principles, how do they think about it? And then it makes it easier should you get to a point where you say, I need to take the keys.
Yeah. Everyone, please join me in thanking Lorna for this incredible conversation.
Thank you.